Welcome to the third day of presentation on ancient river valley civilizations. Let's get started. So one thing, when humans are making cities, we mentioned this last time, where they are making cities are in these river valleys, right? The Nile River Valley, the Tigris and Euphrates River Valleys, the Indus River Valleys, we don't really talk about the Ganges in this class, and the Huanghe River Valley, which is known as the Yellow River in sort of Western speak in English. Okay, and we talked about the societies that were built there. You have Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley, right? The Huanghe River Valley. Okay, I just want you to see these. And then the others that we sort of are not river valley civilizations, but were also major players in that time, or have become sort of major as history has gone on. The Hebrews, or the Jews, who were over off the Mediterranean Sea between there and the Jordan River. The Phoenicians, who sort of were on the coast of the Mediterranean but really traded. That was kind of their thing, seafaring and trade. The Nubians, who were to the south of the Egyptians, right, and had a lot of interaction with Egypt at that time. Now, here we see a picture of a brain surgeon. You may wonder what that has to do with this element of history. I want to say that brain surgery is a job that a lot of people wish they had, right? That's sort of a dream job for some people, to be a doctor or a surgeon, right? So other people dream that they will one day become fashion designers, right? I know several of you in my class are taking fashion design classes. And these are kind of jobs that people wish they had, right? Surgeons, fashion designers, athletes, musicians, rock stars. But they're not the only kind of jobs that there are, right? There's also fry cooks, grocery store shelf stockers. There are people who work in custodial services. There are people who work in all kinds of different retail, etc. I bring this up to show the difference in these kind of jobs is, while there's nothing wrong with working at a restaurant or somebody working at a store, and in fact we need people to do that, millions of people do it, you don't hear a lot of people say, oh, when I grow up, what I want to do is be, a store clerk or somebody who stocks shelves at Walmart. I know people who do this for a living, and I'm absolutely not knocking it. I'm saying this is just usually not something you hear people say, that's really what I want to do with my life when I get older. People tend to say, now, when we say, how do you determine who gets that job then? If nobody wants it, quote unquote, how do we determine who gets it? Well, we tend to say, well, in America or in the West, you work hard and you go to school, and the very smartest people, the very most capable people, they get those kind of dream jobs. They become surgeons or they become fashion designers. And, people who maybe didn't have those opportunities or didn't have those skills, they become, they work at McDonald's or what have you. But in fact, we know that that's not always the case, right? We have something called nepotism, which just means giving favors to people you're related to, or favoritism, where people sort of they help out their friends, right? And maybe not always the most qualified people. We also know that people who have a lot of money, even in our own society, are able to sort of get opportunities that people who don't have a lot of money sometimes cannot have. Now, in the Paleolithic time, this wasn't the case, right? In Paleolithic times, everybody sort of had the same things. So in Paleolithic times, we knew that, people everybody worked together and everybody did the same jobs. There were no brain surgeons or fashion designers. Everybody was hunter or gatherer, right? That's what everybody did. And so the Paleolithic era, we didn't have that issue. So that means it's something that came up in the Neolithic. Now, we're past the Neolithic, and today we have this idea that all human beings are born free and equal. Right? But again, we sort of know that that's not true. I don't live in a house like this, okay? And probably neither do you. That doesn't mean we don't have the opportunity to do it. And in fact, we probably have a greater opportunity to do it today in our country and in other countries like ours than anybody in history, and certainly than people in these Neolithic societies. But the point I'm making is just that we know that some people occupy a higher position in society, and other people occupy sometimes maybe a lower position in society. Now the question is, how did this happen? How did it happen that from the Paleolithic time, when everybody was equal, we have now come into a time when everybody is not always equal? Everybody's not doing the same jobs, and everybody is certainly not living the same lifestyle. Well, once again, as it is with many things in this class, the culprit is farms. Farms are what changed that social structure. And the reason for that is because in farming, right, we don't need everybody working on getting the food. Right? We can have one guy working and a lot of other guys hanging out. Okay? They don't have to be working on that. Now, they're not going to stand around and do nothing forever. Right? That's not how people are, and that's not how society organizes. So what do some of the people start to do who aren't farming in the late Neolithic period? Well, some of them make better tools. We've already shown some images of how we've moved on from the sharp rock, right? We've got rocks on sticks. We've got sharpened knives. We've got plows for digging into the ground. We've got better tools. So some people who aren't farming are now able to do this. One thing that people who aren't farming are doing is they're figuring out that there are better things to make tools out of than rocks. Okay? Some people are getting the metals out of rocks, and the earliest ones of those is bronze, and they're going to start making tools and things out of bronze. So they're doing valuable jobs for society as well. Still, another job that you might not have thought of is in a world where people believe that the gods are controlling every little detail. If it rains, they believe it's because the gods want it to rain. If it doesn't rain, it's because they believe the gods don't want it to rain. So a valuable job in this early setup is to be someone who can talk to the gods and convince the gods to do what they want them to do. Those are called the priests. Okay? Here you see the priests sort of anointing the body of a pharaoh in Egypt, and there's a god actually standing behind him who is going to sort of be appeased here and do good things for the Egyptians because the priests have done their job properly. Another job that comes up is soldier, guard, policeman, right? And he has to guard the property that people now have. Remember, in the Paleolithic, nobody had anything, right? So you didn't need guards to keep things. Now we have farms, we have buildings, we have riches and wealth, and so you have to have guards to protect that. So these are jobs that some people might have. And still other people become builders, right? Carpenters, people make things out of wood or stone, buildings and all these sort of things. All these people who are not farming can now do jobs like this. Now, with all these people doing things, right, that aren't farming, okay, you can start to see some growth. Now, here's a map, just as an example of the kind of growth that's possible. This is a map not of the Neolithic. This is a map from 1642 of a settlement called New Amsterdam. Okay, and you can see there's probably about 100 buildings or so that are scattered on this piece of land, and a big fort right here, and this part's a marshy, sort of a swamp. Okay, and a sheep's pasture is there. Now, this ultimately becomes New York City, right? And I included this just to show you that, you know, as farming gets better, as people, there are more and more people coming and more people who are not engaged in farming and can do things like build and develop a society, a city can get very big. Well, that's true in our own time, and it's also true in the past. You know, this is a depiction of an early Neolithic settlement, right? They're still Stone Age, they're still using stone tools for the most part, wood and stone, things like that. But these are not hunter-gatherers, these are farmers, right? And this is a Neolithic community. You see two houses here, and they're doing some very basic farming, all right? Now, compare that, after just a short while, to this. This is the kind of city we're talking about growing up in a river valley. You can see the river cuts right through, and here's the river up at the top, right? So this may actually be a canal that they've dug. And they've got farms going on the outside. They've got large walled city, and this is a really developed city compared to what you're seeing in this image, right? But this, you know, so this is the kind of growth that's taking place. Now, when you have this kind of growth and all these different kinds of people living in one place, you need a way to control them. This is something that's new in the River Valley civilizations, this idea of government. Today, it's hard to imagine any place without a government, but in the Paleolithic age, there weren't governments. There weren't governments determining who could kill the woolly mammoth or couldn't kill the woolly mammoth. You didn't need them, right? But once you start having different kinds of people doing different kind of jobs and interacting with each other and trading, etc., you do need government. Now today, you know, you see Lincoln up here and Lady Liberty and the Bald Eagle and all this. This idea that we pick our own leaders, that's not how they had their leaders in the River Valley civilizations. They had somebody like this, a king or a pharaoh, who was supposed to be in charge, and supposedly, usually, they were said to be in charge because the gods put them in charge. That's what people believed. And so here we see the sun god is anointing sort of the pharaoh. I believe this is Akhenaten probably, the Pharaoh of Egypt, Akhenaten. But in any case, you see that the gods are empowering the government of these first nations, these first cities, these first states that exist, right? They also had dynasties, right? You didn't elect a new pharaoh when the old pharaoh died or the old king died. The king's son became the new king. Much like this picture here, you have the Queen of England, her son Charles, who will become the King of England when she dies, his son William, who will become the King of England when he dies, and his son, I believe his name is George, who's going to become the King of England when William dies. And this is the same thing you're seeing with Pharaoh. Okay, Pharaoh, it works the same way. So that system really got started back in the ancient river valley civilizations. Now here we see a graphic that divides up two categories of jobs in America in the year 2014. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this list. I myself was military personnel. I don't think it's one of the worst jobs that there are. There are people who love being firefighters, corrections officers, and things like that. There are people who probably don't like their jobs as dental hygienists and systems analysts and stuff like that. But it's just to show you that there are some jobs that people consider good jobs to have and other jobs that people consider bad jobs to have. And some jobs that will make you rich and some jobs that will not. Now in America, if you have a dirty job, a job that's probably something that most people wouldn't want to do, we say that we have a merit system where, well, if you studied really hard and you worked hard, you would get the job that you want, and maybe, people who didn't do the things they were supposed to do would have jobs that they don't want. And that may be more or less true right now in our society, and we could definitely debate about how that works. But in general, we kind of have this idea that that's how it works. But of course, we know that that's very recent. And in fact, up until 1865 and after that, in reality, we were forcing people to do the jobs that other people didn't want to do. Right? We decided that a certain kind of person that we determined was less, or a lesser person, was going to be forced to do the hardest work. And the hardest work, actually, as it turned out, tended to be work on farms. And that's why they forced African slaves to work on farms, because it's very difficult labor. It's long hours. It's in the hottest part of the year. It's the most productive part of the year. It's back-breaking. It's tiresome. And it's the kind of jobs that typically people don't want to do. Farming is very, very difficult, particularly before there are farm machines, which there definitely weren't in the Neolithic. So, in the Neolithic era, slavery was also how things got done. Unlike the Paleolithic era where everyone is equal, by the time that we're talking about the early river valley civilizations, once the first cities and farms pop up, slavery follows quickly. And in almost every river valley civilization in the ancient world, slavery was accepted readily as how work was to get done in farms. These are ancient images I'm showing you of people who are enslaved being forced to work. That's because of farms. Farms brought us many great things. Farms basically are the key to civilization, but farms also brought us some of the negative things. For example, slavery, social hierarchy, different kinds of jobs, good jobs and bad jobs, upper class people and lower class people. None of that existed before farms. All of that comes from farming. Now the Phoenicians, I want to mention, are a little bit of an exception to this rule, because the Phoenicians weren't huge farmers. The Phoenicians were traders, and they traded around the Mediterranean Sea. And trading is also made possible, however, by farming, right? Because before, everybody had the same things, right? And nobody was around to build ships and cargo and stuff like that anyway. But now with farming, some people might grow great apples and other people great grains, and they would now trade some apples for some grains, and people were able to establish early trade networks, and that was largely due to the Phoenicians. And one thing else I want to mention, all of these civilizations are on rivers, right? And up and down rivers. Just like today, you use the highway and you ship things on a truck up and down the highways, and major cities sort of pop up along the highway, and that's how we trade. In the old days, the highway was the river, and this was your tractor trailer truck. Ships got going at this time. The Phoenicians were famous for them, but they also had them on the Nile and the Tigris and the Euphrates, and people were trading along these rivers using ships from farm to farm, from city to city. Now, as we close out here, I want to mention something to you. I've said before that our life is not very much like that of the Paleolithic man. You may know some people who hunt for fun, but you probably don't know people who are hunter-gatherers for a living. However, farms are still around. Governments are still around. Queens, monarchs, and hereditary rulers, dynasties, are still around. Shipping and cargo is definitely still around. And unfortunately, although you may not have known this, slavery is still around in many parts of the world. So I ask you, as you read this quote, to think about the fact that the world you live in is not that much different than the Neolithic world. And in fact, most of the things that we do, the organization of society, the way that things are set up, owes itself completely to the farming revolution, the Neolithic revolution, the agricultural revolution, and the choices, decisions, and structures that were set up by people in the earliest river valley civilizations in Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley, and the Yangtze River. As Faulkner says here, we can see from our similarities of our life that the past is not dead, and in fact, it isn't even past. Here are your notes. Thanks for watching.